Okay, welcome everyone to our fifth and final class on Chapter 7 of Master Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Let's go ahead and start as we usually do with a few prayers. So I will put those on the screen. I might have to change it to, there we go, prayers. Okay, so we'll start by reciting this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And we'll do the short mandala offering prayer in English, making this vast pure offering to all the holy beings so we can receive their blessings and become just like them. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then finally, we'll do refuge and bodhicitta, once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gipe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Let's do a short meditation then before we begin the class, just to give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit and then to generate our motivation of bodhicitta. So we'll spend the first few minutes in silence, meditating on the breath. So use whatever technique you find useful for your own meditation on the breath. And then after a few minutes in silence, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation. So I'll ring the bell to begin the meditation period. So now to set our motivation, we might recollect the first of the four powers that we are exploring in this chapter that have to do with how we generate this joyous enthusiasm for our practice of the path. And the first being aspiration, interest, belief. It has different names, but it has that conviction in karma to begin with, the understanding that we ourselves are in charge of our destinies. We can create the causes for our own misery. We can create the causes for our own happiness. And as I mentioned when we looked at that topic, the main cause for developing enlightenment is this mind of bodhicitta. It has a karma to it because it is a thought that we can create, and by virtue of that thought engage in actions such as being here tonight and studying this text. And in those actions, we then can create the results of enlightenment. So all of the teachings of the Buddha are firmly rooted in the concept of karma. And we need to have that belief, that aspiration that is based on that idea, that thinks that we're here with the understanding that we absolutely can create the causes for our own enlightenment. And moreover, we then can also help to create the causes for others to become enlightened. This is the basis for our path, is knowing that if we simply put energy into those causes through our joyous perseverance in our practice, we can eventually accomplish that goal. And the law of cause and effect is unfailing. Once we have everything in place, we will be enlightened whether we want to or not. But for now, set that motivation then, a bodhicitta that aspires to achieve your greatest potential so that you then can help all beings to do the same. And then we can go about engaging in this class with that joyous enthusiasm, knowing that we're creating the causes for our own happiness, but moreover for the happiness of all beings when we have that mind. Okay, good. So in the last class, we were working with the second of these four powers, which is called steadfastness or stability, the idea being that once we have examined something, such as attaining enlightenment and the Bodhisattva path, and we've made a decision to engage in certain practices and things that will lead us to achieving that result, then we need to see it through to its conclusion. To start and then to stop and not complete things isn't a good habit to pick up. We saw this in some of the verses. They showed the results of having that sort of mind and how that would play out karmically if we continued to do that. So to get things started again, I wanted to just backtrack just a little bit with regard to the verses that we were looking at in the last class. Let me get the slideshow started here. And again, we'll be starting from verse 59, but once more, just to get us grounded back where we were. We had previously looked at some of the obstacles to our having enthusiasm. Now we went into the powers, which are these four factors that do play a role in our joyous enthusiasm. So we're going to complete the second one and then go on to the second and third. There aren't many verses pertaining to those, and then have some of the final advice that Master Shantideva gives us in regard to this. So we're in this extensive presentation. We had these four powers, again, belief that we just meditated on briefly, the power of stability. Within the power of stability, there is the striving steadfastly and then abiding steadfastly. So we're in that second section of abiding steadfastly. We saw it condensed in terms of these three prides, types of pride that are not deluded pride, but rather are a form of self-confidence that we need to have in order to get that steadfast quality to be continuing to persevere in regard to our practice. And we went into that last week, this verse 49, first two lines A, B. Apply pride to the three: actions, afflictions, and ability. So in this verse, Master Shantideva sets them out in this order: actions, afflictions, and ability. ability. But when they're explained in the more extensive explanation, as well as in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, they're explained actions, ability, and afflictions. But nonetheless, we'll look at them in the order they're presented there, just to remind ourselves of these three. We already spoke about action, but pride about action means that no matter who else may be your companion as you practice the path, you don't count on them, but accomplish it yourself alone. So this thought, I alone shall achieve this without having any expectation of others, is similar to pride. So it's given the name pride about action, and it could become a diluted pride. We're going to look at that tonight in terms of making sure it doesn't become diluted. But to have this thought that I will do this myself, you need not do it, and you may not even be able to do it. It might sound like we're putting other people down, but it is an important part or quality of our steadfastness, is to recognize that we have to have that conviction to engage in the actions completely by ourselves, make that determination. We also, again, have pride about afflictions, means that with contempt for the afflictions on all occasions, you think, I shall be victorious over these. They shall never defeat me. It means being steadfast after you've generated the courageous thought to destroy the afflictions, those incompatible factors, things that are obstructing our enlightenment. It is called pride about afflictions because, again, you have contempt for the afflictions and want to destroy them. So you have this quality that is about, I will do this. And so it's centered around the I, and therefore could appear to be pride if we didn't have the right understanding, but it's this self-confidence rather than this deluded pride, or what we sometimes call great pride rather than afflicted pride. Pride about ability means that you accomplish your own and others' welfare thinking. Since living beings are under the power of afflictions, they are unable to achieve even their own welfare, much less the welfare of others. But I am able to accomplish the welfare of both myself and others. So again, you have that elevated sense of I that says, I am able, I am capable, I can do this. And so again, because we're thinking others are not capable, I am capable, it resembles pride. So it's labeled pride about ability. So that was, again, what we went into initially. We looked at pride in action. We're now in the section of pride in ability, and then we'll go on to pride about the afflictions. We're in this section that has to do, whoops, maybe I inserted that slide wrong. In terms of, oh, I'm sorry, maybe I did. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. These outlines get kind of confusing. So we are in this section that is beginning with verse 56. That is essentially starting in your Gyaltsab on page 27. We covered this last time, this outline that's called, It is unsuitable to generate afflicted pride. And so within that, there is the first outline, which is disparaging afflicted pride. That was verse 56. I'm going to go over this tonight again because I had a little confusion in regard to what the commentary was from Gyaltsab, and I just want to clarify that. But this verse says, and again, we're talking about afflicted pride here. So I inserted in there where I thought it was afflicted versus great pride, great being the wholesome version of this, a self-confidence. Any migrating being is destroyed by afflicted pride. Afflicted, he or she has no great pride. We can't have that great pride if they're under the control of deluded pride, afflicted pride. Those with great pride, however, that self-confidence, don't succumb to the power of the enemy being afflicted pride. This last line, it makes it, because of the way it's worded, it makes it sound like you're talking about the same people here, but it's like you're jumping back up to the people who have afflicted pride. And they say those people, though, have come under the power of the enemy of afflicted pride, this enemy that we call afflicted pride that is problematic. So it was a little bit clearer when I went to Stephen Batchelor's translation. And again, someone pointed out, I don't know if it was Richard or who, that they used, maybe it was George, they said that there was self-importance and self-confidence being used there. So again, whoever has self-importance or this afflicted pride is destroyed by it. He is disturbed and has no self-confidence, no great pride. For those with great pride, the self-confidence, they do not succumb to the power of the enemy, whereas the former are under the sway of the enemy of self-importance or afflicted pride. So that was in line with then the way that Gyaltsab's commentary is on page 27. So I don't want to talk about that any further. I just thought I would point that out because I did go back to, since I got a little confused when I was going through it, because I was reading it a little bit differently because of the they and these and whatever. So now there's the second part of this outline, which is the faults of pride. And we went through this last time. Again, I'm not going to go into any great detail. You can read the commentary again, but it's pointing out in this verse that when we're inflated by afflicted pride, we'll be led to the by pride to the bad migrations. It'll destroy the joyous festival of being human, making our lives, not as productive as we would like to, because this human life is so valuable. And so we shouldn't be under the control of pride or any other delusions. And then that we shall become a slave, eating the food of others, stupid, ugly, feeble, and despised everywhere. So that prideful mind, that puffed up mind that tries to place ourselves as more important than others, creates the karma to be subservient to others, to be a slave, and to have all these other negative qualities in our future lives. The final bit of this was that it is unsuitable to abandon it, meaning to abandon it's suitable to abandon it, meaning that it's suitable to abandon this afflicted pride and to embrace great pride. Here again, there were different translations of this that were a little confusing. Here it says tough people inflated by afflicted pride, which is very clear, that when they have under the control of that delusion, are also included among those having pride, which, as I said in last week's class, it means those who have great pride and are thus worthy of praise. So it's like you might think that those inflated by afflicted pride are somehow included in those who have this self-confidence, this great pride, and then you are worthy of praise. And then it says, tell me, but then what is the inferior like? If those people get included in that, well, then, who are who shall we actually call wretched or inferior or what have you? So again, I don't know that I need to say a whole lot more about this, but I will share with you the commentary from Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen's text, because I think it's a little bit clearer there too. He says, if those whose minds are inflated and influenced by afflicted pride, and those with hardships due to their minds being under the control of others, were to be included among those having great pride, who are then worthy of praise, then tell me, what other inferior thing that is an object of compassion is there? They should be included in those that we have compassion for rather than those that we praise, because they are under the control of their afflicted pride. It is inappropriate to have the pride that has come under the control of the enemy, this deluded pride. So again, one translation of this tough people was ascetics, and the idea might be that you could have those people who are, purporting to be ascetics, kind of ascetics in quotes, the people who are engaging in all these practices, but they're filled with their own self-importance, their own pride. And therefore, we might look at them and think that they're supposed to be included, but because they're under the control of that delusion, it's really not appropriate to think of them in that light as somebody we would praise because they have this great pride and self-confidence. Rather, we would look at them as somebody who we actually have compassion for because they're under the control of that delusion. So that was where we went to last week, was verse 59. We are now going on, 58. We are now going on to 59, which is the benefits of pride. We had this one final verse in regard to abiding steadfastly, this pride of inability, this second of the three types of pride. So here, verse 59, Shantideva says, whoever seizes pride in order to conquer the enemy of afflicted pride he is the one having great pride, the victorious hero. Whoever definitely destroys the rampage of this enemy of afflicted pride completes the results of a victor in accordance with the wishes of migrating beings. So maybe before I talk about this verse, I might actually see if there were any questions from last week. I think last week I went almost to the end of class and didn't give much opportunity for questions. So maybe I should open up for that first, just to see if anyone had any questions from last week. I didn't get any by email, so perhaps there aren't any. Any questions? Okay, well then let's get back into the text. For verse 59, instead of using Gyaltsep Je's commentary, here too I'm going to use Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen. So you'll get these in your notes or the file that I'll send out tomorrow. The question is, what is one having pride? The response is, whoever seizes the pride that serves as the antidote in order to conquer the enemy of pride. Again, it gets confusing with these different prides in here, but it's essentially the great pride that serves as the antidote in order to conquer the enemy of afflicted pride is called one having pride, the person who has that great pride, due to the greater strength of the antidote. And the hero who is victorious over the enemy is just that person. So this is, highlighting that the person who has this great pride can overcome afflicted pride. Because if you have that mind, then you will endure against all the afflictions. You will be the heroic in your combat against all the afflictions, including afflicted pride. And this is because whoever definitely destroys from the root the rampage of this enemy of the pride of the inflated mind completes both the temporal and the final results of a victor, a Buddha, along with the exalted activities in accordance with the wishes of migrating beings, including the gods, whereby that person is referred to as victorious over the enemy. So this is essentially what verse 59 is saying, going back to the verse again, that whoever seizes that great pride that can combat and defeat our deluded pride, our afflicted pride, and destroys that enemy completely, completes these results, both temporal and final results, and eventually, is able to fulfill the wishes of migrating beings by attaining Buddhahood. So this is what verse 59 was essentially saying. Now we're going on to the third of these prides, again, the pride that is against the afflictions. This is on page 28 of Gyaltsab Je's commentary, is where the outlines start. The very first of the outlines within this is that one should generate the force of the antidote against the afflictions. And this is verse number 60. So let's take a look at that verse. Shantideva here says, when amidst a class of afflictions, I shall be persistent with them in 1,000 ways. Like a lion among foxes and the like, I will not be injured by the host of afflictions. So the concept here is that if you are, you're developing this pride that is combating the afflictions, that won't allow the afflictions to overtake one's mind. So you're kind of like a lion who can abide among any beasts, foxes or whoever, because the lion is the king of beasts. The lion has no fear. We often talk about the Buddha being lion-like. I think we saw that in a verse last week, right? That the Buddha has that fearlessness because there's nothing to be afraid of when you have achieved that state. So we want to have this mind that is lion-like in this way, that we won't be overcome by anything because of the persistence that we have with regard to applying antidotes against the afflictions and so on. So here too, I'm going to use Abbot Dakpa Gyaltsen's commentary. I sometimes find his commentary to be a little bit more, clear, succinct. He says, when amidst a class of afflictions such as anger, if they abide, if those afflictions arise, I shall be persistent with them through the strength of antidotes of 1,000 types of different methods, recalling that there are many different antidotes that we can apply to the full array of all the different afflictions. Some of them are quite specific to individual afflictions. Some of them are more general. For example, like a lion not being injured by foxes and the like, similarly, I will not be injured by the host of afflictions. So again, in this outline, we're simply looking at how we need to generate that force that is intent upon combating the afflictions as best as we can in that kind of fearless and persistent way. The second outline within this pride against the afflictions is on page 29 of Gyaltsab Je. One should not fall under their control at all. This verse is kind of like in the 8 verses of thought transformation, verse 3, where we say, whenever whenever an affliction arises in my mind, endangering myself and others, I shall combat and avert it without delay, something along those lines. I might have some of the words a little bit off, but this is this idea that we need to be vigilant and paying attention and making sure that the moment an affliction arises, we are there to defeat it. Just as men will guard their eyes, people always guard their eyes to make sure, because if you lost your vision by somebody damaging your eyes, especially in battle or what have you, then you would be really at a disadvantage and would have to live your life without a very important sense. So just as they guard their eyes in the occurrence of great danger, likewise, I shall not come under the power of the afflictions, even when danger occurs, even when the danger of them arising through various, situations, scenarios, I will not let myself come under the power of the afflictions. So as I said, this is very similar to that sentiment that was in the Geshe Langri Tangpa's 8 verses, it's making that determination, to continue to persevere against the afflictions whenever you see even the slightest sign that they're arising, which is hard, of course, to do. Whereas I said, we're going to get some advice at the end of this chapter from Master Shantideva about the factors that we need for that, which is hearkening back to earlier chapters, to chapters 4 and 5, where we saw some of those presented. But we need to have that level. There's even a wonderful quote from I think this is from Geshe Ben Kongyal as well, who is talked about in Pema Chodron's No Time to Lose, or Becoming Bodhisattvas, I think is the new title. But anyway, in this section, she talks about Geshe Ben. Geshe Ben Kongyal, he has this phrase that's standing at the door of the afflictions, holding the spear of the antidotes. Other than this, I have no other job. And that's kind of, how we want to see it, is that we are there with this pride against the afflictions, that whatever is arising in the mind, we will defeat it. We know the exact antidote to apply, and I'm not going to go into all the antidotes for all the various afflictions, but you can study those in the Lam Rim texts and know that when hatred is arising, that we need to apply love, for example, or when attachment is arising, it's good to apply an understanding of impermanence, or to see the unpleasant qualities of the object we're attached to. There are a lot of different techniques that are used, but this is our job. This is the big job of guarding our minds and being, attentive to them. So here in Gyaltsab is just a short commentary. He says, when great danger, and I'm leaving out this little phrase, the great danger of the afflictions, because it does seem some confusion as to why that's in there, and might be in there in error. But when great danger occurs, then humans protect their eyes with great concern. So if something's going on, somebody's shooting off fireworks or something, and you see things start flying, then you guard your eyes, because you don't want to get things in your eyes that could damage your retina or what have you, make you lose your vision. Similarly, when there is the danger of falling under the control of the afflictions, one should take care not to be controlled by them. So again, very simple thought on this. I don't know that I need to say a whole lot more, but it's a big task. It's easy to say this verse. To actually do it is a whole nother thing. So the third section here, one should generate the special thought to generate a stable antidote. So here, Master Shantideva, in what appears to be a 6-lined verse, there is a footnote in some of the text saying that these 2 lines occur in some editions of the text, Tibetan editions, but they're not in the Sanskrit. And so it's unclear whether these are the actual words of Shantideva or somehow they crept in there, but nonetheless, they're perfectly fine. They're not erroneous words by any means. Here, Shantideva says, it would be better for me to be burned, to be killed, or to have my head cut off, rather than bowing down to the enemy of afflictions. Likewise, in all situations, I should do nothing other than what is fit. I should, do what needs to be done to combat the afflictions, to keep them from arising, and not succumb to them in any way, shape, or form. No, and those are tall orders. If someone said, that they were going to kill you, and you had a choice between generating a delusion to save your life and being killed, burned, whatever, it'd be very hard to have that level of courageous perseverance that would, do that. But again, recall what we saw earlier in terms of we don't start immediately at the highest level practices. We start where we are and we build up our stamina, our ability. And then over time, some of these things that might seem really significant now but they'll be insignificant at that time where we're called upon to do that, perhaps. So anyway, this is talked about again on page 29 of Gyaltsab. He says the measure of having a stable antidote is the following. It is easy for one to die through being burnt by fire or having one's head chopped off. I don't know, it's easy for one to die that way. I'm not so sure, but anyway, not at this point. But one should not at all bow to the enemy of the afflictions, which of course we find really easy to do. Right? We find it much easier to bow to the afflictions, just give in to our attachment or our hatred or whatever. But it should be the opposite. These things that are really challenging for us now, we should find easier, and and do those rather than bowing down to the afflictions. That we make sure that we don't do that in any instance whatsoever. Likewise, one should on all occasions destroy the objects of abandonment and make the antidote stable. Thus, one should not act in any way other than appropriately. So once more, this is kind of a tall order, but nonetheless, it's giving us kind of setting the bar, where we have to be ideally through practicing this second power. Again, we had the power of belief or interest. This was entirely on the power of steadfastness, stability, making sure we keep our mind moving in the right direction. Of course, what gets us off track is primarily the delusion of laziness that we looked at earlier, but we can see how other delusions also will derail us, will take us out of that practice of the Bodhisattva into our normal samsaric behavior. So it is important that we have that power, obviously, and that was the one that Master Shantideva actually spends the most time on out of these four. Now we go on to the power of joy. And of course, as you know, this is often, we are referring to this fourth perfection in chapter 7 as joyous effort. We often throw in that word joy because this is an important component of our practice. I think I told you before, but I had one teacher who said that if you're practicing the Dharma and it isn't joyous and fun, well, then you're doing it the wrong way. So we do have to have that element of joy that we bring to our practice. And they use an interesting analogy for that, like a child engaged in play. And anyway, we did look at this previously, I think, when we introduced each of these powers. But here we're going to just spend first a minute or two looking at what Tsongkhapa says in the great treatise, Salam Rim Chenmo. Again, this is on your handout. You develop the power of joy after the first, the power of aspiration and intense yearning, produces a joyous perseverance not previously present. And secondly, you have achieved the power of steadfastness, also called the power of pride. Again, we'd explained that earlier, which causes the perseverance that has already developed to be irreversible. So again, you can't say that these are absolute in terms of when they are generated, but the power of joy comes on the basis of some level of yearning and aspiration and some level of having some stability to one's practice so that we do persevere through what we need to get through to accomplish the goals on the path. The power of joy means that when you first engage in an activity, you do it joyfully. And once you have engaged, you have a sense of being insatiable in that you do not want to discontinue the activity. So strive with an attitude like that of children who engage in play without being satiated. That is, you must be just as insatiable about what causes pleasurable results as you are about the results themselves. So this is how they often point it out, is, we really enjoy having all these wonderful things in our lives that bring us pleasure, whatever those might be, a lot of sense objects and whatever. We put all of our, kind of dedication to those pleasurable results, but are we putting the energy into what creates that? And so if we generate this joyous mind, then we're just as joyful creating the causes for those pleasurable results as we are enjoying them. This is an important feature to acknowledge, is that if we aren't as enthused about creating the causes and joyous about that, well, then we're not going to be creating those pleasurable results in the future. They are going to elude us. So this is divided into just 3 sections and only 4 verses in this section. This is on page 30. The very first outline is one should strive in virtue independently of the ripening result. So here Master Shantideva says, just like those who desire the pleasurable result of play, this bodhisattva adheres to whatever task he or she may do. Not satisfied by it, it makes them happy. So again, the idea here is, he's not satiated by it, it makes them happy. So the idea here is that we don't kind of look at the reward being the result that we're going to get from our actions. So we don't get so focused on, okay, if I engage in all these virtuous actions, then I'm going to get this, and I'll have that out there in the future. The act of doing these becomes happiness itself. The joy of engaging in virtue becomes the reward itself. Bodhisattvas don't need to know that these are going to ripen into these other results and put all of their money on that. They will engage in the activities of benefiting others, practicing generosity, patience, what have you, because it's joyful to do that, because it gives them great joy to be of service to others. So again, this is how we're framing joy in this context, is developing this inner joy that allows us to be in whatever practice we're doing on the Bodhisattva path and make it into a source of happiness for us, rather than waiting to create the causes, for that future happiness that we'll experience when we get the results of those actions. So here, Gyaltsab Je says, just like children desire the resultant happiness of play, so should bodhisattvas have joy and grasp at their actions for the purpose of others, such as listening, contemplating, and meditating on bodhicitta. Again, such an important practice that's emphasized throughout this text, and we're going to see it coming up again in chapter 8, when instructions are given on developing bodhicitta through equalizing and exchanging self and others. But we should have this like children at play, just engaging in our practice joyfully because we enjoy it so much, because it is a source of happiness and well-being for us in the midst of it, because we know that we're dedicating our lives to others. We know that we are being of service to others, whether we're meditating on bodhicitta or practicing generosity, what have you. So one should be so joyful that one desires the actions continually without being satisfied by them. So this is the gist of this, is that if we have that joyous attitude, then we spend more and more time on it. Of course, once more, we have to acknowledge where we're at and where we're coming from. No doubt for many of us, we still have a lot of joy and enthusiasm about more mundane activities. But recall that once more, that is a form of laziness when we put all of our energy into those because we enjoy them and we find them useful. You do need to have some portion of your life involved in activities to make money, to, you know, I don't know, kind of round out your life to some degree. But at the same time, do you have the same level of joy for your Dharma practice, for your meditation, what have you, that you do for your mundane activities? They often point out how like you can sit down to meditate and you just like don't have much enthusiasm for it at all. But if somebody says, "Hey, there's a really good movie on," and then you go, "Oh, wow," and you go over and you watch this movie for 2 hours, whereas you couldn't even meditate for 2 or 3 minutes, because you didn't have that enthusiasm. It's a good measure of whether we have that type of joy for our virtuous activity. So let's continue with the next outline. This has 2 verses with it. It's called accomplishing virtue by keeping the result in mind, by actually, recognizing that this is energy we have to put into to create the results that we are seeking. Although people work in order to be happy, it is uncertain whether or not they will be happy from that work. And this is very true. People can work very, very hard and not gain much happiness at all sometimes because it's uncertain whether they will actually create the causes for happiness by that work. But how can those whose work itself is happiness find happiness without doing the work? So once more, going from that first verse where we looked at the idea that this is the work itself is joy, the work itself is happiness. Well, then how are we ever going to get that joy without doing the actual work of practicing the Dharma and so on? If I am not satiated by desirable objects, which are like honey smeared upon a razor's edge, then why am I satiated by merit, which is ripening in pacification and happiness? So this is kind of a question being put forward. I guess the one way to look at this is that we can't have enough. If we use this phrase, if I can't have enough of desirable objects, which are actually kind of honey-coated razor's edges, they have that painful side of them because they only create the causes for more suffering for our attachment to them and so on. Well, then, why do we think we can get enough of the merit which actually ripens into future happiness? We don't have the same level, again, of interest and desire to pursue these things. We love to pursue all the sense objects and all of the pleasure that we get more temporally, but we don't have that same enthusiasm for creating merit, which actually results in the full ripening results of liberation, enlightenment, good rebirths, all of those things, and complete, the peaceful state of happiness that we can attain at the end of the line on the basis of all of that. So let's look at what Gyaltsab Je says. We're still on page 30. He says, though worldly beings engage in actions such as field work in order to attain mental and physical happiness, it is actually uncertain whether the result will be happiness or not. Only the actions of bodhisattvas are certain to bring about temporary and ultimate happiness. The temporary happiness of actually engaging in them, as well as what other results karmically we might get from that, but the ultimate happiness of enlightenment that we can attain through all of the actions we do, motivated by bodhicitta. And he goes on to say, and if one does not engage in these actions, then how could one attain the resultant happiness? The happiness of practicing those in the moment, the joy we gain from our enthusiastic engagement in the bodhisattva's deeds, as well as all the resultant happiness that we'll get all the way through to enlightenment that we create karmically through our actions. Then in regard to that second verse, it says, sensory happiness of form, sounds, and so forth are like honey on a razor's edge. We've all heard this, right? On a razor blade, honey on a razor blade. It may be really delicious while you're licking it, but then you're going to cut yourself in the process of that, and it'll become very painful. Well, all the sense objects that we tend to engage in, again, because we have afflictions like attachment and so on, then we create the causes for our future pain. Again, it doesn't mean we have to stop having pleasurable objects, just don't pay any attention to them. So some people may find that useful initially to kind of give themselves some distance to work with them, but recognize that they are traps for us. They suck us in and they cause us to get seduced by that temporary pleasure, but they have a dark side to them, because if we develop that attachment, that craving, grasping, then we are going to end up wasting our time and actually creating the causes for future suffering, as opposed to the resultant happiness that we seek. So he continues and says, when tasted with one's tongue, then, although experiencing some taste, some nice taste, one experiences the suffering of being cut on the tongue. If one is not satisfied by cyclic existence, no matter how much one is engaging in it, then how can one be satisfied by the merit of generosity and so forth, which is the cause to attain the temporary happiness of higher rebirth of gods and humans, the ultimate happiness where all suffering has been pacified? One should meditate on them insatiably instead. We kind of have it again backwards. Master Shantideva is pointing out how we have this insatiable appetite when it comes to all of the sensory objects, pleasure objects, but we don't have that same insatiability when it comes to our practice of the Dharma and our accumulating merit. We have it backwards because these are actually the cause of future suffering potentially, because once more, we're going to have a lot of attachment the more that we surround ourselves with these sensory objects if we haven't disciplined our mind. And we're going to stop creating the causes for experiencing temporal and ultimate happiness because we're not being insatiable with regard to our practice of virtue. And once more, recognize that we're all on our own continuum. It's not to say that we can flip a switch and we can go from whatever we're doing today to engaging in virtue from the time we get up till the time we go to bed and throughout our sleep and whatever. We don't have that ability, but it's important to keep moving in that direction. And what's being pointed out here is that if we actually see the causes, that these are the causes for our future happiness, and the happiness of others much less, which isn't really pointed out here, but then we should be joyously engaging in these. We should feel insatiable. I need to do more practice. I need to do something more. I need to spend my time doing these things, as opposed to continuing to go back to the pleasure bar, getting lost in all of those temporary pleasures. The next verse is the last one in this section, the outline, third outline, the way of relating it to the power of joy. This is on page 31 of Gyaltsab. First, the verse, thus, in order to complete this task, I shall engage in it just as an elephant tormented at midday enters into a lake. I'm sure we've all seen these, nature documentaries, nature shows, where they show the elephants all arriving at a water hole, particularly like if it's, in the middle of the parched summer where they haven't gotten rain, and then there's the monsoons or whatever that come in and they fill the lakes with water, and the elephants come and they're just tormented by the heat in the middle of the day when the sun is bearing down on them, and they just joyfully enter into that water. So we should be doing the same with regard to our practices. We should be joyfully engaging in all of our Dharma, our meditation, and so on, study, with that same kind of mindset, because we see that what we have found is actually once more the source of all the happiness for ourselves and for others. I think this is something once more that we can see why it's built on the previous powers, is because if we don't have that aspiration, that yearning that has conviction in all of that, and then moreover the steadfastness that recognizes that we have to be dedicated to continuing things, then it's hard to muster up that joy for it. But this is the challenge, is to bring that joyous quality to our practice. Here, Gyaltsab Je simply says, because it is an action suitable to engage in, therefore, in order to complete the intended action, one should engage in it like an elephant, tormented at noon by heat and thirst, that comes upon a lake and immerses itself joyfully in it. So it's a nice image, to work with, to kind of think about. That's how we want to be doing our practices, as if we're kind of parched and are being satisfied by our practice in ways that will truly satisfy, rather than the sense objects that don't really truly satisfy. Whoops. I put those in when I need to know where I left off on my preparations, so I can delete that afterwards, because I finished my slides earlier today. The power of relinquishment is the fourth one. And this only has one verse to it, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit because I think it is important to know what this is and to apply it correctly. Here, Tsongkhapa says in the Lamrim Chenmo, if you become physically or mentally fatigued from your perseverance, you must rest for a while. Otherwise, you will become exhausted and very disheartened, thereby later preventing your joyous perseverance. So we know that this is true, right? They even, have this term in our culture of burnout. Like if somebody just keeps at it without giving themselves any break, any rest, then it's very hard to continue to do that. And you can actually kind of screw yourself up to some degree if you don't tend to that in a more spacious way, put it that way. Immediately after you have rested, persevere again, though, and when you have completely finished your earlier activity, do not let that satisfy you. You must joyously persevere at other higher activities. You must avoid both being overly intense and being overly relaxed. So make your effort continuous like a river. So this is this whole idea, this whole concept that, of course, is such a key one in Buddhism. Buddha taught the middle way between like having this exertion that is intense and unrelenting versus the complete laxity of laziness, where we just think, oh, well, it'll get done, but we never put the effort in at all. And there's that wonderful analogy of a stringed instrument. If you have a stringed instrument that you play, you know that if it is too tight, the string could break. If it was too lax, then you can't play. So we want to find that middle way always, where we bring it to this point where it's somewhere in the middle between those two extremes, where we feel like we can joyfully engage in our practice and be very enthusiastic about it, and we give ourselves a break when we need to. Especially when we've accomplished a task, we can stop and maybe have some, take a breath or two or more, and, even rejoice, celebrate what we have done. But then, always have that in the back of one's mind, that this is so that you can get up off of the couch or whatever and do what you need to do to keep moving forward, to keep elevating, yourself on the path all the way to enlightenment. So this is an important part of this relinquishment. I think it's a tricky one sometimes in our culture to find that balance, to find the middle way between those. And sometimes, we might even convince ourselves that we're doing it well, and we may be leaning on the side of relinquishing too much, of not putting as much effort in. But remember, it's a process, and everyone is going to be different in terms of where we're at in that process. So for some of us to put a little bit of effort into Dharma might bring, we might take a lot of energy. It might actually be something that we do need to give ourselves a fair amount of rest to be able to do it again. For others, you may be further advanced along to where your practice is so joyous that you don't want to take that break, and you won't overexert yourself. You'll actually find a way to manage all of that. So everything is going to be different for each of us. So don't take this advice again as hard, fast, identical for every person. Verse 67 is the only verse that pertains to this. It's divided into actually two parts: temporary relinquishment in the first two lines and certain relinquishment in the last two lines. But let's just go ahead and look at the verse altogether. I didn't break it out into those two parts. When my strength is related to degeneration, I should leave whatever I am doing in order to return to it. So this is the idea that, when I don't have the strength to keep going, then I should set it aside for the moment in order to return back to it, to keep the work going. But then the second part, if something is finished well, though, if we've actually accomplished a particular task, say that many of you do preliminary practices, say you accomplish your 100,000 prostrations or whatever it is that you're working on, then, you put it aside, meaning, okay, I've completed it. I have done that. I can know that that task is accomplished, and have the wish for more and more later, that we actually will feel enthused about doing more at a later point. And that's how we keep everything going, is through those two ideas of kind of temporarily relinquishing when we don't have the strength to keep going. And then when we have our little milestones, that we accomplish, to actually give ourselves some space and time to then recharge and tackle the next one, tackle the next preliminary practice or whatever it is. Here, Master Shantideva, and this is divided into those two parts, but he says, if one is affected by one's weakening strength, if one is physically and mentally exhausted by one's practice of virtue, one should relinquish temporarily, to then start again when one is rested. So again, for all of us, it's, I would guess every one of you, I know for myself, you're not at the point where you can practice Dharma 24/7. It's just not happening. 24 would be a bit crazy, because then you'd be practicing all night. Some people have that ability, but it's okay. You don't have to be, doing that. But recognize that when you have accomplished a fair amount in the day, or you're in the middle of things and you feel you're losing your energy, that there's nothing wrong with relinquishing the task for the moment, to recharge, to rest a bit before going back at it again. And then there's a certain relinquishment here. He says, if an action is completed, though, and completed well, then one relinquishes it because one wants to repeat that action again and again, to kind of taking on a new task, doing the next thing, what have you. So again, this is the way that we get through all of this, is by this power of relinquishment that allows us, permits us to take charge of ourselves. Now, it's kind of interesting. Lama Yeshe, he was talking in one of his teachings. This was actually one of the last teachings he gave, and I think it was at Kopan in 83 when he died in 84. So sometime in that time frame of late 83. It's actually a teaching that you can find in the Discovering Buddhism materials, maybe even at the FPMT's website, that's on bodhicitta. And he says, you can come home from even just a full day of work and you get exhausted and you just need to lay down on the couch. He says, no problem, lay down on the couch, but lay down on the couch with bodhicitta. Don't just make it into a mindless act of attachment and laziness. Make it into something actually virtuous. So even when we relinquish, even when we feel we need to rest, even when we go to bed at night, we should be doing so with a wholesome mind. We should be doing that with the mind of bodhicitta that recognizes that we're not, Energizer bunnies. We just can't keep going without, any stop. We have to take a rest occasionally in order to have the energy to get up the next day and do the work again. So let's go on then to these last two sections now. We're going back to sort of the beginning of the outline in terms of the text. And let me get to that. Oh, I've actually had something more to share on this. That's okay. I think you can read this when you get the notes tomorrow. There's a little bit of a quote from Lama Tsongkhapa. I don't think it's so necessary. Maybe I'll share this last little bit. There was a quote from Maitricitta, who's actually Ashvaghosha is what he's known as in many texts. You might have heard that name rather than Maitricitta. Or Matrichetta, I don't know how it would be pronounced, says in his praise in 150 verses, this is a praise of the Buddha. In order to make yourself exalted, neither tightness nor looseness ever occurred in you. Thus your attributes are indistinguishable by former and later phases. So this is a praise to the Buddha, recognizing that the Buddha found that middle way between the tightness of, asceticism, self-mortification, what have you, and the looseness of overindulgence in sense objects and what have you. To find that kind of middle way kind of means that then the attributes of former and later phases are indistinguishable because there's a constancy, there's a continuity, because you're able to set things aside when you need to, apply them when you are, do that, and you go back and forth between these, and there's no real difference then. It's not like you have huge gaps where you're not doing anything, but rather a much more continuous flow because you're tending to yourself with that middle way mentality. So as I said, we're going way back to the outline that had to do with increasing the antidotes. This was way back when we first started this section on page 15, increasing the antidote, the power of enthusiasm. It was divided into increasing the powers that are the conducive conditions for enthusiasm, which we just completed, those 4 powers. And now we go on to the second outline here, which is being sincere about practicing all the Bodhisattva's deeds, the actions, with mindfulness and introspection. And then we're going to go on to the last one, empowering oneself to achieve these actions. So as I said, we're going to hearken back a bit to the earlier chapters that we saw, chapter 4 on conscientiousness, chapter 5 that covered guarding alertness or introspection, as well as mindfulness, talked a lot about mindfulness. So here, this is divided in turn into, that's the bottom of page 31 is where the outlines introduce, but the outlines that underneath it begin on the next page, page 32. The first outline is one should be sincerely conscientious. Recall that conscientiousness is this virtuous mental factor that keeps us aware of the direction we're going in. It is a very powerful force for our practice of virtue. And it was in chapter 4 on conscientiousness that we looked at how it's applied to engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, refraining from negative actions, and so on. So this is in turn, whoops, I went up. No, I'm sure it's not divided into any further outlines. This is on the top of page 32, verse 68. Just as a seasoned soldier engages in a fencing battle with the enemy, so shall I avoid the weapons of the afflictions and attack the enemies that are the afflictions. So if you have a very seasoned or experienced soldier who is on the battlefield, they will do 2 things. They will avoid being harmed by the weapons of their opponent, and they will attack the enemies that are holding those weapons so that they can no longer harm them. So this is kind of these 2 qualities of our mind that we need to have through our conscientiousness to avoid being overcome by the afflictions, to be harmed by them, and to do what we can to apply the antidotes to them so that we diminish their power and eventually eliminate them. So here too, I've decided to use Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary for this. Whoops, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button, page up instead of page down. Here, Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen says, just as when a seasoned soldier, someone who is skilled in tasks with weapons and in combat to the enemy, engages in a fencing battle with the enemy, he avoids the weapons and attacks the enemy with his own weapons. So shall I avoid the weapons of the afflictions, turn them away, and destroy the thoughts of the afflictions, and attack the enemies that are the afflictions with the weapons of the antidotes, and eradicate them from the root. I mean, these sometimes are blending together, but they're really 2 different ideas. The first one is to not be harmed by the afflictions, to be able to turn them away, and then to apply something that is the direct antidote to that, the opposing force to it. As I mentioned earlier, we were talking about having the pride about the afflictions. There are many different antidotes that are taught, some that are quite specific to individual afflictions, some which can be used across the board. And the ultimate antidote to all the afflictions is the wisdom of emptiness, which we'll study when we get to chapter 9 sometime next year. Thus, the foremost Tamche Khenpa, who is one term, honorific term for Tsongkhapa, also says in the Lamrim Chenmo, when a seasoned, that should say soldier, I don't know, this is coming from that handout, so it's probably wrong on the handout too, rather a solder. When a seasoned soldier, an expert who is accustomed to combat, engages in a battle with the enemy with swords and the like, he does not put value only on destroying the opponent. Rather, he must accomplish both tasks, being skilled in avoiding the harm of the weapons directed at himself, as well as destroying the opponent. Destroying the force of that affliction through applying an antidote, a sort of offsetting weapon that will combat them. Likewise, when a practitioner combats the afflictions, he must strive by being skilled in both, being cautious of and avoiding the mind being wounded by the afflictions, and destroying the opponent, the afflictions, in reliance upon the antidotes. So as I said, there are many antidotes that are taught, but if we can bring those antidotes to mind, oh, somehow my camera went away. Let me see if I can, oh, there it is. I unplugged it because I was having, it was getting very fuzzy, I noticed. So I hope it's a little bit better quality now. Anyway, this idea of antidotes. So what I was saying is that there are many different antidotes that are taught, and you can go to the Lam Rim text, especially in the middle scope. And maybe we'll study the Lam Rim, middle length Lam Rim of Lama Tsongkhapa at some point and go through all of that. But essentially, these are the ways that we can combat these afflictions to actually do something that, as I said, is an exact opposing force to them. So when they begin to arise, we have a lot of techniques we can use there. We can simply, change some thinking about that, framing that, and so on. But to actually go at, what will be a direct counterforce to that might entail a different meditation. And the techniques are always to investigate these, to study them, to meditate on them so that we can then bring them to mind whenever these afflictions arise. Remember, I had that quote from Geshe Ben Kongyo earlier that you're standing there at the door of the afflictions with the spear of the antidotes. That's the most powerful way to combat them. And as I said, these two tasks kind of get blended into one to some degree, because you're not being harmed by them, but you've got the spear ready to stab them, to kill them. There's a lot of wartime analogies again in this, warrior analogies in this text. But again, we're not that far away from all this. We just perhaps have different implements of destruction that we use in our battles. But I think we can all, get some of what's being said in this section in terms of these different analogies with weapons. So here it says, I'm sorry, I already went through Abbot Dukpa Gyaltsen, so I don't need to go through that. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one more bit for this. For otherwise, although this practitioner may use the antidote to stop an activity of one portion of the afflictions, they're either robbed of some part of virtue by other afflictions, or else they develop a great misdeed in their mind, whereby both the harm of the afflictions and the creation of virtue are equal, in which case it will be hard to make progress in virtuous training. Essentially what this little passage is saying is you have to be able to commit to these things kind of fully. Otherwise, you can end up with kind of mixed results if you're not being good at applying an antidote. And by virtue of that, that affliction keeps arising again. Just like if you had an enemy on the battlefield, you might be avoiding their sword or their spear or whatever. But if you don't actually defeat the enemy, you're going to keep facing it again. You're going to keep having problems with the enemy again. So that's the idea behind that verse. Let's go on to verse 69. Verse 69 is in this second section called Being Sincere, about mindfulness and introspection. These two factors that, again, we talked about in chapter 5. Mindfulness being a non-forgetfulness with regard to what it is we are doing and the object we are focusing on or the situation we are in, so that we then are always in the path of virtue. And this introspection or guarding alertness is what checks in to see that we are actually doing that. Sort of like a spy that makes sure that we're on target with what we're trying to accomplish. So the analogy is still in the battlefield, and it's saying that if someone dropped their sword during a battle, they would quickly pick it up out of fear. Likewise, if I lose the weapon of mindfulness, afraid of falling to the hell realms through the succumbing to that delusion, I should quickly retrieve my mindfulness. So this is making our mindfulness into our sword that we are able to apply at the time to make sure that we continue the battle against the affliction. But if you were to drop your sword, drop your mindfulness, lose that awareness of what you're trying to do, and keeping the mind in virtue and so on. And of course, you'd lose your introspection then too, because introspection is the factor that makes sure that we're doing that. But if you have lost that, then you need to regain it. You need to have it there again as an active force. So here, this implies this kind of urgency that we need to have with regard to our practice to make sure that we're on top of it all the time. Gyaltsep says on page 32, if one's weapon falls out of one's hand in the midst of battle, one quickly picks it up out of fear of being killed by the enemy. Similarly, if one loses the weapon of mindfulness, which does not forget the virtuous object, then out of fear of the lower realms, or whatever fear you want to generate, but knowing that succumbing to the afflictions is going to be problematic in terms of future results, by remembering how one will be born there if one is destroyed by the afflictions, one quickly picks up the antidote of mindfulness and introspection. These two companions that work on the path, especially, to keep us doing what we're doing, to apply them virtuously. Again, mindfulness and introspection by their nature aren't virtuous. They are virtuous when we apply them to virtuous tasks with virtuous mental factors accompanying them. Let's go on then to the third outline within this section, where we're looking again at this practice of mindfulness, introspection, and so on. This is not giving an opportunity for faults with our mindfulness and introspection. So through our mindfulness and introspection, not allowing the faults to arise. Just as poison spreads throughout the body in dependence upon the bloodstream, once the blood enters, or the poison enters into the body, then it is carried throughout the whole body by virtue of the blood. Likewise, if it finds an opportunity, misdeeds will permeate my mind. If the afflictions find an opportunity, if they make it into your system in the way that poison would get into your physical system, they come into your mind, well, then they permeate your mind and cause misdeeds to occur. And if anger comes into our mind, for example, and it's not checked, it's not confronted with our mindfulness and introspection, then we are going to fall prey to it, and we will engage in verbal and physical actions that will be motivated by that, and create, again, as we just saw in the previous verse, the causes for our future suffering. But this is the idea that we need this mindfulness and introspection to keep those from doing that. There's a second verse in this section. It says, just as a man carrying a jar full of mustard oil in the presence of someone wielding a sword who is being threatened that he will be killed if he spills it will be frightened, likewise, those who have the modes of conduct should be equally attentive. This is again, you may have heard this analogy before. If you had, and this was actually in the time of the Buddha, there was a practitioner named Katyayana, I think was his name, and he was demonstrating his mindfulness by doing this. There were actually these guards there that had these swords, and he had this jar of mustard oil that was filled all the way to the brim, so that there wasn't any room for any play with it at all. And he was so mindful that even in the midst of this king trying to distract him through having, dancing women and whatever, all these various delights going on around him, he maintained his perfect mindfulness so that he could, walk all the way across the room with this, jar of mustard oil and not spill one drop. They often use the analogy too of like walking along a very steep precipice. Some of you perhaps have done this in parts of Nepal or what have you, where you and your yak have to get around on various places, and you can be fairly close to the edge in these things. You know what your mindfulness is like then, when you have this need to be attentive to what is going on because you could lose your life. Well, it's a similar kind of scenario. And what we want to be able to do is have that same level of increase in our mindfulness and introspection when we're doing our virtuous activities throughout our day, or when delusions are arising, whatever, so that we know that we're doing what needs to be done and staying true to that. So here, Gyaltsab Je, the commentary is on page 33. He says, if one is hit by a poisoned arrow, then just as the poison will spread through one's body, in dependence on the blood that is coursing through one's veins, so will the faults of anger and so forth pervade the mind if they find an opportunity of lapsed mindfulness and such due to afflictions. So again, this is our job, to stay vigilant and have the mindfulness of what we're doing so that we don't fall prey to them, so they don't go coursing through our minds in the way that poison will go through our veins. Therefore, one should stop even the smallest affliction. Even letting the smallest one through is problematic. The question is arising then, how should one be attentive? And that's that second verse with the mustard oil. Answer, a person that is carrying a jar filled with mustard oil along a slippery road in front of someone carrying a sword, under the threat of being killed if they spill even just one drop, will be very attentive, right? If you know that this sword is like right behind you, ready to chop off your head if you drop one drop of oil. A practicing bodhisattva should be similarly attentive in holding the antidote of bodhicitta and so forth with mindfulness and introspection. And again, there are many other antidotes, but obviously our bodhicitta is what all of these are rooted in. And we want to have the strength of our bodhicitta so that we stay true to what it is that we are trying to accomplish within this context of having this joyous effort, this joyous perseverance, and overcoming, of course, the antidotes or the opposites, which are the three types of laziness. So we don't fall prey to those. We actually have some force behind overcoming them. This fourth section is on page 33 as well. If a fault arises, one needs to stop it immediately. And there are 2 verses for this section as well. Therefore, just as I would hastily, stand up, get up if a snake came into my lap, if I looked down and saw that there was a rattlesnake in my lap, for example, maybe I wouldn't get up that quickly because I could get bit by it, but maybe a spider, you see that there's a spider crawling on you. You don't just like go, oh, there's a spider. Maybe somebody will, if you're quite friendly with spiders. But for most people, they see something dangerous in their lap, they immediately get up and shake it off and get it onto the ground so that they don't have any danger from it. Likewise, if any sleep or indolence occur, I shall quickly turn them back. So again, applying this to those counter forces to our joyous effort, the 3 types of laziness, our sleep, indolence, whatever, our attachment to worldly activities, all these various types of laziness that are set out in Buddhism. If those things arise, we should be just like that person with the snake on our lap, immediately getting rid of that. Each time a misdeed occurs, I should deride myself and then contemplate for a long time. No matter what, I shall not let this happen in the future. This idea of deriding ourselves, and we're going to even see in the commentary that, criticizing, deriding ourselves. I know in the West we have a hard time with this because we do this too much anyway. Kind of put ourselves down thinking that we're horrible practitioners and what have you. Do this with compassionate self-discipline. Don't do this like you're, some bad parent, trying to beat your child into behaving correctly. Rather, do it with a softer edge and understand, whatever way that works for you to make sure that you reinforce this desire to not let that happen again if you've fallen prey to the afflictions and had actions that followed from that. So here Gyaltsab says, since one will go to the hell realms if one's virtue is destroyed by afflictions, one should, out of fear of the hell realms, quickly stop sleep and sloth, which cause one to withdraw involuntarily if they come, just as one would leap up quickly if a poisonous snake would come into one's lap. So again, that's the idea behind that first verse we looked at. Then the question arises here too, as it did with the previous 2 verses. Well, then how should one stop them? What's the method for doing that? The answer is that with each fault that arises, one should criticize oneself, or again, discipline oneself in that compassionate way, saying, when I acted like this in the past, many unwished for things happened and I did not achieve what I wanted, recognizing that our past faults have led to our own suffering and so on. Do I really still have to act like this? Been there, done that. Isn't it good for me to avoid those things and to actually move in an opposite direction? Then one confesses with the 4 powers. We've talked about those previously. The 4 powers, the opponent powers that help us to purify any negativities, any faults that we've engaged in, and motivates for a long time thinking, I shall make an effort that this fault never arises again. Of course, that's part of our 4 opponent powers, right? The power of our resolve that we make at the end of the practice so that we determine we're not going to do those things again to the best of our ability. But it's being accentuated here because that's how we actually move in that direction to get rid of our laziness or other, faults that we have. We're down to the last section in this part, and we got then just one more part with 2 more verses. So let's go to that. This last part, 5th section in this, one should strive in suitable actions. This is verse 74. Whoops, I did it again. How did I do that? Likewise, in all situations, I shall acquaint myself with mindfulness. With this cause, I shall wish for encounters or appropriate actions, encounters with teachers, gurus, to try to continue and further my spiritual development, and in my wish to engage in appropriate actions and all of what is virtuous and leads to the results that I'm seeking. So here on page 34, Gyaltsab says, thus, in order for faults not to arise and to eliminate those already arisen, I shall meditate on mindfulness on these occasions that call for sincere conscientiousness and introspection. Through the cause of the motivation saying this to oneself, I shall desire suitable actions, valid according to the teachings, following what the teachings are telling me to do, when I meet with the Mahayana Guru, or even if I do not meet the Guru immediately, whatever, if I'm in the presence of my teachers or still, yet to encounter them, I will follow the advice regardless. I will do what needs to be done to maintain that mindfulness, conscientiousness, introspection. Again, all factors we looked at in chapters 4 and then in 5 when we examined mindfulness and introspection there. We are down to the last outline. Let me finish these. And then there is a little bit of a additional section in Gyaltsab that's kind of a summary of everything. That's really nice to go through, but I don't know if I'll have time to go through it. You can read that on your own. This first outline is called Empowering Oneself to Achieve the Actions. We have within it 2 outlines. Verse 75 is the outline Being Light in Taking Up Virtue due to mental and physical pliancy. By light, they mean you don't have kind of a heavy-handedness to what you're doing because you've become very supple. You have this kind of pliancy, serviceability of the mind and body, which don't achieve to their greatest extent until one achieves calm abiding, that very stable mind of meditation. But nonetheless, we do get some serviceability of our mind and body through our continued practice. Verse 75 says, in order to have strength for all, I should recall before undertaking any action the advice on conscientiousness thus, and then rise with lightness. Kind of if we recall our conscientiousness are driven by that, then we just go about doing what needs to be done, and it doesn't become, a big ordeal. Here, Gyaltsab says, in order to have the power of strong enthusiasm for any virtuous action, beforehand I shall remember the advice regarding conscientiousness and rise lightly in the virtuous action without the harm of a negative action. Kind of just stay true to what it is that you're doing. You've got your conscientiousness already in place, which is speaking to what direction you need to go into to practice virtue, to avoid non-virtue. And you just lightly go about it. And lightly here, I mean, it's a strange word in this context, but I think it means, again, that you're not doing it with any real consternation. You're doing it with the joyous enthusiasm we've been talking about, all of those sort of powers behind the scenes supporting it. But this is how we go about doing the actions in our lives, physically, verbally, mentally, whatever they are, is not making them into anything that requires too much consternation if we're really staying true to the ideas that are supporting all of it. Then we have this relating the example in the meeting, and this is a kind of an interesting one because it goes back to the first verse and talking about wind. Remember how the first verse had this idea of wind being what kind of propels us forward. Just as the wind blowing back and forth controls a piece of cotton, or sometimes in other translations they say flaxen threads, or even the lichen in trees. In the South they have this very often of like lichen hanging down from huge trees, and it just kind of sways in the wind, right? But whether we talk about a piece of cotton or threads or lichen, so shall I be mastered by enthusiasm, and in this way I will accomplish all. And this kind of gives once more that sort of lightness to it. You just have this wind that is this force that just keeps everything kind of moving, in motion, moving, where we need to go. Again, just to remember what that first verse was like, I threw it in here in the slides. This is how we started this chapter. With patience, the previous topic of chapter 6, I should undertake joyous effort. Enlightenment will dwell in those who strive. Just as there is no movement without wind, so merit does not occur without joyous effort. So it's kind of putting it back into that category of this is kind of the wind beneath our sails. It is what actually allows us to move forward, to do what it is we need to do. And it has that lightness to it, that quality that we can just rely upon over time as we develop it more and more and more. On page 34 at the bottom, Gyaltsab says, how should one act then? Just like the coming and going of the wind controls the cotton, letting one's actions of body and speech be controlled by joy. In virtue, one will achieve one's virtuous actions of the 3 doors quickly. So if we just allow this joyous effort to be the the movement, the force that keeps us moving in that direction, that keeps us, engaging in virtue through what we say, what we do, and so on. Well, we'll make it there. Rest assured that all of our actions will stay true to that, because we had that conscientiousness again involved, as well as our mindfulness, introspection. We just need that force of the joyous enthusiasm to get us there. So now there is, on page 35, as far as I can tell, this even starts with that top part and continues on to page 36. As I said, a sort of summary of the whole chapter. Maybe I'll just point out a few things here. We might go through that first little verse, because this is something new. It says, in short, as it says in the Sutra of Close Placement by Mindfulness, the one basis for the afflictions is laziness. Who has it? Wherever one laziness exists, there all dharmas become non-existent. So we really get that laziness is the enemy of our dharma practice, is what really we've been trying to combat throughout this whole chapter, by understanding it, by seeing the various types of it, by developing the powers that overcome it, even the introspection, mindfulness, and so on that we just looked at today. The need to have that joyous effort behind engaging in all of our actions. So it says one should strive in generating enthusiasm that stops laziness. To this end, one needs to make an effort to clear the opposing factors of enthusiasm and to generate the conducive conditions of the four powers, which we already examined. And then he goes on to talk about, kind of how you could classify laziness. And they do it a little bit different. We talked about the three lazinesses, but two of them could be summarized together, because in one case, you have the conviction that you can attain enlightenment, that you can do it, but you don't do it because you have indolence, or you are too busy with your worldly activities that you're attached to. The other case, which was our third type of laziness, is where you don't have the conviction that you can do it. And that becomes an obstacle in and of itself. We saw that earlier. So again, and there were, within each of those, there were a number of things that were used as antidotes to those, and so on. So you can read through this and gain an appreciation for what's added there at the end. Even some of the sections, remember how I said Tsongkhapa, did a presentation this way in regard to the laziness of discouragement, and yet that's not how Gyaltsab had his outlines. Well, Gyaltsab does include that in this, tail end, where he talks about discouragement. If you look on page 35, the second to last paragraph, it says, with regards to discouragement, there are again three antidotes, or three types, thinking I cannot attain the infinite qualities of a Buddha, thinking I cannot accomplish the infinite difficult actions, such as offering my arms, legs, and so forth to others, thinking I cannot bear the sufferings of the infinite rebirths and cyclic existence that I would have to take. Remember how we looked at all three of those that are obstacles, and then there are antidotes to them in the last paragraph, which I won't go into tonight again because we went through those. But it's very nice of Master Shantideva, or Gyaltsab, to put these on the tail end to kind of summarize everything for us. So you might find that useful to go through. The last thing that I'm going to touch on before I kind of open it up to see if there are any last questions is that you have this in your handout as well. It's not part of Shantideva's text, and I don't put it on the homework or anything, but you might just take a look at how you can practice each of the perfections within the other perfections. And so with joyous effort, you can practice it with all six perfections present. And these are very similar to what we've seen for the previous perfections we've looked at, perfection of morality and the perfection of patience. Let's just go through one or two of these, and you can, again, read them on your own in the handout. Generosity with joyous effort while practicing your joyous effort. Lead others into the practice. This is a form of generosity, that we want to bring them to the Dharma, help them to, create the causes for their future happiness. Teach them how to apply joyous effort to their Dharma practice, and give encouragement to those who have diminishing interest and energy for their practice. Let me jump forward to joyous effort with joyous effort. How do you make your joyous effort enthused by even more joyous effort? Allow the tendencies that you develop through the practice of joyous effort to help you to practice it continuously in the future, and aspire to be able to continue to practice joyous effort until attaining enlightenment. So those are the ones, again, I'll just touch on those few, but you can read through those. They're very similar to what we've seen previously for ethics, to make sure that you're not harming others, going against your vows, whatever, when you're engaging in joyous effort, and so on. but each of them have that ability to be practiced within each of the other perfections. So I'm just pointing those out. I don't know, be a useful way of kind of helping to bring everything together in terms of these. So let me see if there are any questions from tonight or from the course, since this is our final class in on chapter 7. Anyone? If not, then I might just talk a little bit about chapter 8, which is coming up next. Again, in the description I gave to Maria and to Jennifer to use, and Sheila as well, to use in the publicity for this, I talked about how it's really almost 2 equal parts. Chapter 8 is a bit long, but the whole first part is mostly about meditative concentration, which is what the title of that chapter is. We're getting to the 5th perfection, the perfection of concentration. And then the whole second part of it is using as a topic or an object of meditation the technique for developing bodhicitta through equalizing and exchanging self and others, which I touched on when I taught chapters 1 through 3 at Shantideva Center almost a year ago, exactly. So when I was there a year ago is when all these Shantideva teachings started, and I did talk a little bit about that technique. But here Master Shantideva gets into it in much more detail, and it's a really wonderful part of this chapter. I will be providing everyone with, I found this somewhere in materials, a transcript of when His Holiness the Dalai Lama taught this. It was actually teachings I had the pleasure to attend in 1999 at the Kala Chakra Empowerment in Bloomington, Indiana. And so I'll be getting those to Sheila and to Maria, and they can make sure Jennifer put them out on the website so people can access those, that you can use those in your study of chapter 8, as well as Geshe Yeshe Tupten's book or whatever other resources you're using. As far as I know, there's no real published commentary just on chapter 8 like there was for chapter 6. But for chapter 9, we will have some by His Holiness that are unique to chapter 9. But when we'll start that in January. January 4th, I think, is the day. Isn't that the day? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I have to pull up the calendar. I could be wrong. It's still a little ways away. Yeah, January 4th, it's a Monday. And there will be some breaks in there for the holidays. We do have a couple of those holidays that occur at the beginning of the year: Martin Luther King Day, President's Day. If everything goes as planned, and I would expect that at this stage, but we'll probably go till about the beginning of April, the first Monday in April. It could be a little bit shorter. I forgot that there's one whole section in meditation, the meditation part, that's all about of course, it was Master Shantideva as a monk teaching other monks, trying to get them to recognize that the attachment they have to the female form, to a female body, can be diminished by seeing the unattractive aspects of that body. And so it's meant to be applied for anybody attracted to whatever gender you're attracted to, but nonetheless, it can be a section that's probably better to go through really quickly because it's just verse after verse about talking about all the undesirable aspects of a body, and yeah, I mean, we do need to get that so that we aren't so attracted to our own bodies or to the bodies of others, but nonetheless, it's a bit kind of the same theme going on for quite a while. So I may be able to get through it a little bit, quicker than what I thought, but I'm making no promises. As you know, we just have to go with the flow and see what happens. But so anyway, let's do our dedication verses again. If there are no other comments or questions, criticisms, anyone want to criticize me? You're welcome to. Oh, there's a cat. I see Francesco and Alessandro's cat. I don't know if my cats were in the background. Sometimes they show up, but let's go ahead and do some prayers together just to conclude tonight and to dedicate all the merits we've created through this course of looking at chapter 7. So let's go to the 2 verses that we generally do at the end of each of these classes, where we think about all the merit that we've created by turning our minds towards the Dharma, all the words that we've heard, the thoughts that we've had, everything, may this become the cause for the resultant state of ourselves attaining enlightenment, and then being able to lead all beings to that same state. So let's recite this verse together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then, as we've been talking about throughout this course, bodhicitta is really at the center of the entire text. And we know our own familiarity with this mind, and we know how much it still has to grow and develop. So we're making that strong aspiration that that happen for us and that it never decline in any way. But we can extend this out to others as we've been doing, especially our leaders at this time, people who are in positions of power in this world, in whatever countries they are. May they develop this sincere wish to be a benefit to all beings. May that grow rapidly in their hearts so that all their actions can follow from that. And may all our actions and others' actions follow from this powerful mind of bodhicitta. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then recognizing how much we depend upon our holy teachers, our wonderful gurus, we're going to recite some prayers for their good health and long lives, specifically for His Holiness and Lama Zopa. But as we recite these prayers for these two teachers, think that we're creating the causes for all of our spiritual guides and all the spiritual guides that are helping beings in this world to find a path that leads to happiness, peace, compassion, and so on. May all these beings have good health and long lives, and may we and others always have perfect guides in our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then, for Lama Zopa, let's do this prayer. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then I think at the end of the other ones, I don't know if I did this then, but I like to do this if possible, is to recite the dedication verses from chapter 10 of the text that we're studying. And we can bring to mind all those beings that we're holding in our hearts before we recite this, beings that we know of who are experiencing obstacles or illness, who are dying or who have died, as well as others in the world whose situation moves us. And really think of them specifically benefiting from what we've done in this course and in tonight's class. But also we want to extend this out to all beings so that all beings experience freedom from all suffering and attain the happiness that is their true potential. So let's recite this set of verses from Shantideva to dedicate all the merit from this course. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth. How did it do that? These buttons on my computer are not cooperating. Down a little bit more. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all, may all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. So I want to thank you all for this course as well as for all the courses throughout this year. It's been wonderful to spend all this time with you and these Monday nights. And I'm looking forward to the new year. I hope everyone has a wonderful, safe holiday season. Please do stay safe and healthy. Get out and vote if you haven't voted. It's so important to vote, really important to vote. And yeah, let's make prayers that the best possible outcome for ourselves and all the beings in this world will come about through this election. So, all right,
Okay.
thank you all so much. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
this. So,
Thank you, Don. This is really
blessings.
wonderful. Thank you.
You're very
See you in
welcome.
January.
Great job.
Yep, I will see you.